All right. Now we move to Trump's goons just scooping people off the street. We've seen the videos, taking their phones, putting them in handcuffs, and schlepping them into a van and then taking them off to God knows where. Seems like the place of they like is this detention center in Louisiana, so they could be going from Boston or New York, and then fighting it out in court. And how, again, my appeal to Elon Musk and Joe Rogan, who supposedly are standing up for free expression in our country and essential liberties, which is like supposedly the backbone of the MAGA movement. How they would tolerate this is really there's so many things upsetting about this, but just some of my liberal friends go, Ben, what did you expect? I go, I don't know. I expected people to stand by the principles they say they believe in. If a guy like Joe Rogan or a guy like Elon Musk, who've dedicated their public lives to espousing the notion of free expression and free markets, can't stand up against this kind of blatant intolerance, then what, I don't know, all is hopeless. I mean, they have so much power and money. There's no excuse for them being so silent. And I know Joe Rogan occasionally says a little thing, like one sentence in a 3-hour show. And one sentence. Oh, I don't know about that. And everybody, whoa, Joe Rogan, way to go on a limb there, Joe. So anyway, help me out with this one, Jim. Again, my wife's question: how is this legal? Go ahead.
Well, the rendition of people to an El Salvadorian torture prison with not just not abiding by due process, but stridently making the public statement that they do not owe any due process. And of course, then it comes out that they've actually sent people who had committed no crimes and were in the United States legally, is so deeply disturbing. I don't, we get caught up sometimes in whether we're analogizing too heavily to Germany in the 1930s, but just grabbing people and then saying we don't need to offer any evidence, or these absolutely baffling statements like, well, the absence of a record for this particular guy means he was part of Tren de Agua or whatever it is. What the hell are you talking about? You mean that you couldn't find evidence means he concealed it so effectively that even you didn't know? sorry, Your Honor, officer, lawyer, Department of Justice person, whoever you are. Then why did you scoop him up in the first place? What the hell are you doing? And then we find out that these, and by the way, I try to reserve my moral indignation and getting really pissed off about some of this stuff, because otherwise it would just be overwhelming. But the statement that they can't or won't do anything about this guy from Maryland who is now there is so beyond anything. I just, by the way, because honestly, like, we know Donald Trump is text buddies with this guy. Every bad actor around the world, whether it's Kim Jong-un or Vladimir Putin, he loves talking to these people, and they love him. You're telling me if he didn't call the president of El Salvador and said, listen, I got to save some face. I don't want this guy to be tortured. Can you please just ship him back to the United States? By the way, I think we're also paying for them to be there. So are you telling me that we couldn't say, okay, we're just cutting that contract? Maybe they would just want to keep the prisoners anyway. But I assume that the whole purpose for El Salvador was to get American dollars for their torture prison. So that is extremely disturbing. And I don't, this is kind of about the spell breaking, but I don't know how a MAGA person, a Trump person, wouldn't think to themselves, couldn't that be my friend? Couldn't that be me? They're literally saying they don't have to have any evidence. That's what due process is. You and I laughed about the notion that during the Trump prosecutions for the past 4 years, that suddenly everybody on the right learned what due process was, and they couldn't stop themselves from complaining about and whining about Donald Trump not receiving enough due process. Yeah. And as we pointed out on this show, and I think is very is backed up by the facts. Nobody's ever gotten more due process than criminal defendant Donald Trump. Got every break. He argued every motion, every delay, every kindness that they could offer. They put a little shawl around him when the court was too cold.
Yeah.
And so suddenly Tom Homan, who seems to just have absolute contempt for human beings, and granted, you have to be tough to run ICE, I guess, but somebody who's that punitive should not be in charge of an agency that can strip people of their rights or incarcerate them, because he almost seems like he's enjoying it. I don't know the guy, so I can't say for sure, but that's what it looks like to me. So they're disappearing people, and it's not just the guy from Maryland. There's other people in those prisons who, by the way, they're not from El Salvador. So if you're not from that country, the odds of you being mistreated and abused in that prison skyrocket, because who's going to care? Yeah. And there's no habeas corpus at that place. They don't have those rules that we have here where you can try to petition to get someone released. Apparently, the United States government isn't going to do anything about it. So this is very disturbing. And I will absolutely make the leap to say this is a precursor to just doing this to anybody that they want to sweep off the streets. Yeah. Why else would they assert that they don't even need to show you a scintilla of evidence? Or, you know what? That's all classified, so we can't show the judge. You mean the judge who has special security clearance to read all that stuff, who actually oversee terrorism cases or wiretap cases or things that are classified? That judge can't look at this material, even in camera? Or we're going to invoke a law that's based upon us being at war, where we can disappear people off the streets, which we're not at war, and claiming that fentanyl coming into the country is somehow putting us at war is absurd on its face. But it's a problem when 52 senators agree with that premise, and suddenly it's being legitimized, even though it's patently absurd. So this is like a confluence of all kinds of horribles, and the threat that this suggests exists is very real. Because the people that are being put in charge of the Department of Justice are just doing whatever Donald Trump says.
And to tie the two themes together, again, the pro bono work that these big time law firms were so proud of was securing the release of prisoners who were unjustifiably detained. And like, going back to our question, well, the pro bono work, does that mean they're going to drag in Doug Emhoff's law firm to defend the actions of Trump's goons? I mean, the ramifications of all this stuff, it's all tied together, Jim. And you're right. I really share your. You're right. This is a step. How far can he get away? How much can he get away?
The government says take our word for it, and why this person should be incarcerated should scare the shit out of everybody.
Yeah.
Period. Because that's what it would mean. We can't show you the evidence. We won't even show the judge, but the person's already in a jail somewhere. Yeah. Why wouldn't this happen to an American citizen? Yeah. Do you seriously feel like there's so much prosecutorial restraint and ethical restraint that they wouldn't do that? I think you'd be a fool to think that that's the safeguard that will keep you, your friends, whoever it is that's listening to this, safe.
Well, we'll see how far this goes, and we're just at the outset of this, because right now there's appeals and they're before judges, and judges have asked Trump to stop or to justify what he's done, and so far Trump has not stopped and not justified, and so sooner or later there will be a showdown decision on this matter. I presume most people are predicting it'll be the Supremes that have to weigh in on some test case that will really force Trump to confront. Am I going to violate a very clear order from the highest court in the land? And we're a ways from that, Jim. I don't think the Supremes, are they, I just can't at the moment remember, are they entertaining any of these cases of people snatched off the street? I don't believe they are as we speak.
It hasn't gotten before them
That's-
yet. But the thing about the way that this is playing out in the courts is in the form of an injunction,
Yes.
which is something that happens immediately with very limited evidence. The judge is basically making a snap decision because if time passes, there will be irreparable harm. That's the phrase that pays in the equity courts. So that means that appeals can happen very quickly, and it could find itself before the Supreme Court. This term lasts for another month and a half or 2 months, possibly before they're out. And even during the summertime when they're not sitting, there can be, like an appeal that goes up that they do on their shadow docket. You see orders that get entered in July and August and September sometimes, where it's something that has to be done on an immediate basis. But something that, if it really is what you're suggesting, and it's a question of the powers under any of these laws that they're using to justify these actions, where someone is incarcerated, whether it's here or El Salvador or wherever, I would think that's not going to get decided on a memorandum order that's unsigned, per curiam, so to speak. Probably would require a fuller hearing, but then you have the problem of, well, what do they do if they're not sitting at the time that it's presented? Usually Supreme Court decisions aren't that timely. They're something where there's lots of writing, there's lots of research, there's lots of deliberation. And if it's a 4-3 or 5-4 or whatever the division is, it takes more time because they're talking to each other about whose decision is going to control and how it's going to be phrased and back and forth. So but the notion that it invokes so many issues, and really the core of what an executive who is charged with executing the law has the power to do, means it's kind of inevitable, because they are trying to push the boundaries, which apparently is the theme of today's show.
Yeah, pushing the boundaries.